In order to successfully grow food with minimal inputs, it's really important to be able to take into account the local landscape, the local weather patterns, conditions, climate, and all of those different aspects. Yeah, we can talk about pests and diseases as well, but it's also important to take into account the whole physical landscape and the weather patterns and climate, because those conditions can be what really makes or breaks a crop, literally. All right, so here we have a companion planted plot of Ethiopian eggplant, or the bitter tomato, not a true tomato, and we have sorghum here as well. Initially, I wanted to try this as an experiment because I had no idea how it was going to go, right? I didn't know if the Ethiopian eggplant was going to outshade the sorghum and prevent it from growing, or prevent it from growing well. And then the sorghum, on the other hand, can be allelopathic, and I didn't know if that would affect the Ethiopian eggplant. Overall, the Ethiopian eggplant seems to be quite productive here, producing a bunch of these eggplant-like fruits. They're kind of smaller, but I mean they're supposed to be this size, right? Producing a pretty good amount. And then we have the sorghum, which this type of sorghum, originally when I bought the seed years ago, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years ago, the sorghum plants grew a lot taller, and these are kind of probably maxing out at like over 6 feet here. And that's totally fine. I just don't know why. I don't know if it's been the last couple of years have been a little bit more droughty, or if these plants are adapting to this climate, the shorter growing season, so they can't grow as tall because they need to be able to set seed before the frost hits, right? Before the growing season comes to an end. So anyway, whatever. Either way, it works out because the shorter these sorghum canes are, the more resistant they are to windy conditions and things of that nature, especially up in these temperate climates in the late summer, early fall, mid-fall, when weather conditions can get a little bit more volatile or active. So that's really kind of a good thing. And the other thing I've noticed that's really good is that this Ethiopian eggplant is actually helping to keep this sorghum up, right? The Ethiopian eggplant has these big leaves, so these sorghum canes just kind of lock into the plants. So how I have this set up is I have one row of Ethiopian eggplant going down the center, right? The plants are so overgrown, it's hard to see now. And then I have 2 rows of sorghum, right? One on this side and then one on the other side of that Ethiopian eggplant, and that's the garden bed. I also had, I believe I had some cucumber plants here earlier in the season, but they died back. And then I didn't mulch this bed as early, so these Ethiopian eggplants, while they do look pretty good, they're not quite as robust as the ones in the next row, but overall they're pretty close, and these are managing quite well. So the Ethiopian eggplant branches out, and it helps to hold these sorghum plants in place, right? And it provides a safety net. And then I also have, you can like incorporate some more perennials into this system too, where like I have a red chokeberry here that provides a little bit of a windbreak to part of this, and then some additional support too. So with bolstering the sorghum between that and the Ethiopian eggplant, so just even small things like this are good to think about, keep in mind, experiment with, play with, as we try to learn how to work with our climate and our weather conditions as much as possible to produce a yield of food a little bit more reliably, right? That takes into account the natural weather conditions and how those can change. So overall, this is definitely a companion planting strategy that I intend to use again. Maybe even experimenting the sorghum with other things, other plants as well. You know, maybe even tomatoes, and if they're staked, and then I could grow the sorghum on either side of that to an extent. That might be something that can work. The pepper plants would probably be a little too short for this, but the Ethiopian eggplant would be a win. And some of those other plants that can get to, you know, about 4 to 5 feet tall. And those are the plants that can really give the support to the sorghum. And, you know, I'm also maximizing yield here between, I'm getting the fruit, right, from the Ethiopian eggplant, which can be used similar to eggplant. Even the leaves of the Ethiopian eggplant, the really young ones, can be cooked and added into soups and stuff. That's more of like a famine food. You know, I've tried it. They have kind of a rough texture, but they can be added. I try to cook them pretty well into soups, stews, sauces, you know, maybe a tomato sauce, where they can add a little bit more bulk, a little bit more nutrition, but not change the flavor too much or anything like that. And then I also have the sorghum that is producing grain, right? Maybe in some cases it can also produce a sugar from the stalk, like a syrup, sorghum syrup. And then even earlier in the season, I had the cucumbers. Both of these plants, the Ethiopian eggplant and the sorghum, have fairly deep root systems, so they are sending more carbon deeper down into the soil. They're helping to break up some of that compaction. And I know the Ethiopian eggplant is, I believe, a mycorrhizal species, so it can form some of those associations. The sorghum has its own unique microbiome that it helps to facilitate in the soil and support. It's almost like you have a cover crop, right? But you're also kind of harvesting stuff. So, you know, so it's not like a true cover crop, but you still have these soil benefiting cycles happening where you're able to take all this photosynthesis, right? The Ethiopian eggplant with its large, broad leaves, and it can grow and tolerate and survive in even like really hot conditions. Then you also have the warm season grass of the sorghum that is a C4 photosynthetic plant. So you've got some pretty high-powered photosynthesis going on here. So in that, we're able to really pile in this carbon into the soil, right, and help to rehabilitate that process while getting an edible yield. So even if I need to add more support to the sorghum and the Ethiopian eggplant, like if I'm expecting a more windy conditions, or, you know, whatever the case may be, or some storm is going to roll in, I can even take rope or, you know, string or twine or whatever, and I can actually weave in between the Ethiopian eggplant and the sorghum, right, to create a little bit more resistance to the wind. Especially in this case, because the sorghum is not a whole lot taller than the Ethiopian eggplant, right? So these are two plants that can really kind of support each other in this case. And so that can help to prevent the sorghum from blowing over or lodging, or you know, having the stems split and break, at least to an extent, right? Depending on how severe the storm might be. In other cases, you might just have to cut your losses and harvest the grain that you have and keep it in a sheltered location so it can dry and mature the rest of the way as much as possible. So thank you so much for checking out this video on the companion planting of the Ethiopian eggplant and the sorghum. These are two crops that can add an edible yield to one's diet, right? And it's really important to start thinking like this, to start thinking about these things and how different plants can kind of fit together in different ways, right? Whether it's physical support or you know, nutrient support, or crops that occupy different root zones, or certain crops might help deter pests from other crops, or some plants can bring in beneficial insects, right? And it's just that whole aspect, that whole organic approach to looking at all these different systems and being able to piece together a garden that is as resilient as it possibly can be on that local landscape. So thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Take care.